It started with shampoo, not money, not texts, not lipstick on a collar, shampoo. The morning I grabbed Daniel's bottle from the shower shelf, I didn't expect him to explode. I didn't expect him to rip it from my hands like I'd touched something sacred. And I definitely didn't expect him to scream at me over a $5 bottle of hair product. But he did. That reaction changed everything. Because when someone guards something that hard, they're not protecting the object. They're protecting what it represents. And what Daniel was protecting? It was a life I didn't know existed. A woman I'd never met. And a little boy who called him Daddy. My name is Ava Mitchell, and this is how a bottle of shampoo exposed my husband's secret family. Before we continue, kindly comment the city where you are watching from and make sure you subscribe to the channel so you never miss a new story like this. Now let's continue. The bottle was almost empty when I picked it up. Daniel kept his shampoo on the left side of the shower caddy, next to the cheap bar soap and the razor he never cleaned properly. I'd walked past it 1,000 times without thinking twice. But that Tuesday morning in March, I was running late for my shift at the clinic. My own bottle was bone dry, and I made a decision that would unravel my entire marriage. I grabbed his bottle and squeezed a dollop into my palm. The scent hit me instantly, warm, sweet, like vanilla mixed with amber and something floral I couldn't name. It smelled expensive. The kind of product you find at Sephora, not the aisles of a Columbus Walmart where Daniel usually shopped. I stood there under the water, confused, running my fingers through the lather as steam filled the small bathroom of our duplex on Henderson Road. When I stepped out, Daniel was standing in the doorway. "Did you use my shampoo?" His voice was tight, controlled, but his eyes told a different story. "Yeah, I ran out of mine," I said, toweling off my hair. "I'll grab more after work. It's not a big deal." "It is a big deal." He crossed the bathroom in 2 steps and snatched the bottle from the shower shelf. His knuckles went white around the plastic. "Don't touch my stuff, Ava." I froze. We'd been married 5 years. We'd shared bank accounts, a bed, a life. I'd used his deodorant before, his toothpaste, his t-shirts. He'd never cared. But now he was clutching a half-empty shampoo bottle like I'd stolen something irreplaceable. "Daniel, what's wrong with you?" "Nothing's wrong with me." He turned the bottle over in his hands, inspecting it like he was checking for damage. "I just don't like people using my things without asking." "People? I'm your wife." He didn't answer. He just walked out of the bathroom, taking the bottle with him. I stood there in my towel, water dripping onto the tile floor, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My husband had yelled at me over shampoo, not expensive cologne, not a family heirloom, shampoo. The kind of reaction you'd expect if I'd gone through his phone or opened his mail. But this was hair product. That's when I realized something. Daniel wasn't angry because I'd used his shampoo. He was angry because I'd noticed it, because I'd asked about it, because for just a moment I'd stumbled into something he'd been carefully hiding. I got dressed in silence that morning. Daniel left for work without saying goodbye, and I drove to the clinic with my hair still smelling like vanilla and amber, replaying that look in his eyes over and over. Fear. That's what I'd seen, not anger. Fear. That night, I checked the bathroom cabinet while he was watching TV in the living room. The bottle was gone. He'd taken it with him, hidden it somewhere I wouldn't find it. And that's when the questions started eating at me, quiet and persistent, like a splinter I couldn't pull out. "What are you hiding, Daniel?" I met Daniel Mitchell at a hospital fundraiser in the fall of 2018. He wasn't the loudest guy in the room or the most charming. He was quiet, steady, the kind of man who listened more than he talked. He worked as a warehouse supervisor for a logistics company on the east side of Columbus, managing shipments and inventory for retail stores across the Midwest. He told me he liked the work because it was honest, physical, something you could measure at the end of the day. We got married a year later at a small ceremony in German Village. My parents flew in from Michigan. His mother came alone because his father had passed when Daniel was 16. We honeymooned in Nashville for 3 days because that's all we could afford. And when we came home to our duplex on Henderson Road, I thought I'd found the kind of love that would last. Simple, dependable, real. For 5 years, that's what I believed. Daniel worked long shifts, sometimes 10 hours, sometimes 12. He'd come home exhausted, smelling like cardboard and diesel fuel, and collapse on the couch with his work boots still on. I'd make dinner while he scrolled through his phone, half asleep, too tired to even talk about his day. On weekends, he'd sleep until noon, then spend the afternoon doing yard work or fixing things around the house that didn't really need fixing. I thought he was just tired, overworked, trying to provide. But looking back now, I can see the cracks I ignored. He guarded his phone like it was classified information, face down on the table. Always. If it buzzed during dinner, he'd glance at it but never pick it up in front of me. He'd wait until I left the room, then disappear into the bathroom or the garage for 10 minutes. When I asked who was texting, he'd say it was his boss or a coworker or something about a shipment delay. I believed him because I wanted to. There were the overtime shifts too, almost every Saturday, sometimes Sunday mornings. He'd leave early, come back late, and hand me his paycheck like proof that he'd been exactly where he said he was. Except I never actually looked at the pay stubs. I never checked the hours. I just trusted that the man I married was telling me the truth. And then there were the weekends he'd leave for an hour or two without explanation. A quick run to Home Depot, grabbing lunch with a buddy from work, picking up parts for his truck, small errands that didn't require details. I'd ask where he went, and he'd give me an answer that sounded reasonable enough that I didn't push. That was the pattern. Reasonable answers. Just enough detail to satisfy me. Never too much. I told myself I had a marriage worth fighting for. A husband who worked hard and came home every night. We didn't have much money, but we had stability. We had a plan. We talked about buying a house someday. Maybe having kids once we were more financially secure. I thought we were building a future together. But Daniel wasn't building anything with me. He was maintaining 2 separate lives, carefully balanced, meticulously scheduled, making sure the lies never touched. And the only reason I didn't see it sooner was because I'd mistaken his exhaustion for devotion. He wasn't tired from working overtime. He was tired from being 2 different men. I couldn't let it go. For 3 days after the bathroom incident, I watched Daniel move through our house like a stranger. He was polite, distant, careful not to leave his phone unattended or his wallet open on the counter. He showered with the bathroom door locked, something he'd never done before. And every morning when he left for work, he'd take a small gym bag with him that I'd never noticed until now. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was reading too much into a single argument about shampoo. But paranoia doesn't keep you awake at 3 a.m, staring at the ceiling, trying to remember the last time your husband looked you in the eye. Instinct does. So on Friday afternoon, I stopped at the Walmart on Morse Road on my way home from the clinic. I walked down the hair care aisle until I found it. The same brand. The same bottle. Vanilla Amber Fusion with argan oil. $14, not $5 like I'd guessed. I bought 2. That night, while Daniel was in the garage organizing his tools, I went into our bathroom and locked the door. I opened his shampoo bottle and poured half of it down the sink. Then, I filled it back up with water from the tap, shaking it carefully to mix the consistency. It looked thinner now, diluted. The scent was weaker, but still recognizable. I set the bottle back on the shower caddy exactly where he'd left it. Then I waited. Saturday morning, Daniel woke up early for his so-called overtime shift. I pretended to be asleep as he moved around the bedroom, getting dressed in the dark. I heard the bathroom door close, the shower turn on, and then, 5 minutes later, silence. The water shut off. I held my breath. The bathroom door opened. Daniel stood in the hallway, wet hair dripping onto his shoulders, holding the shampoo bottle in his hand like he'd just discovered a crime scene. Ava, I sat up slowly, rubbing my eyes like I'd just woken. What's wrong? Did you touch this? He held up the bottle. Touch what? My shampoo. Did you use it again? I shook my head, keeping my voice steady. No, you told me not to. I haven't touched it. He stared at the bottle, turning it over in his hands. He unscrewed the cap and smelled it, tested the texture between his fingers, held it up to the light like he was checking for contamination. His jaw tightened. Something in his face shifted from confusion to panic, and I watched him try to hide it. It's different, he said quietly. Different how? The scent, the consistency. It's not right. Maybe it's just old, I offered. Or you got a bad batch. He didn't answer. He just stood there in the hallway, staring at the bottle like it had betrayed him. Then he grabbed his gym bag from the closet, shoved the bottle inside, and left the house without breakfast. I listened to his truck pull out of the driveway. I counted to 60. And then I got out of bed and checked the bathroom. The backup bottle I'd bought was still hidden under the sink, untouched. Which meant Daniel hadn't just been upset about the shampoo being diluted. He'd been upset because he needed that specific bottle. The full one. The one that smelled exactly right. And now, he didn't have it. That's when I understood. This wasn't about vanity or preference. The shampoo wasn't for him. It was for someone else. Someone who expected him to smell a certain way. Someone who'd notice if he showed up with the wrong scent or the wrong texture. Someone who mattered enough that he'd panic over a ruined bottle at 6 a.m. I sat down on the edge of the bathtub, hands shaking, staring at the empty spot on the shower caddy where his bottle used to be. And I realized that the man I'd married was living a life I knew nothing about. A life that required specific products and careful schedules and lies I'd been too trusting to question. Whatever Daniel was hiding, it wasn't small, it wasn't casual. It was something he was willing to protect at any cost. The following Saturday, I called in sick. I told my supervisor at the clinic I had a migraine, which wasn't entirely a lie. I'd barely slept all week. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel's face in that hallway, staring at the shampoo bottle like his world was ending. I needed to know why. I needed to see what he was hiding with my own eyes, because the not knowing was worse than any truth I could imagine. Daniel left for his overtime shift at 7 a.m. I gave him a 10-minute head start, then got in my Honda and followed. He drove east on I-270, past the exits for his warehouse, past the turnoffs for any store or friend or errand he'd ever mentioned. He wasn't going to work. He wasn't running. Errands. He was driving with purpose, like he'd made this trip 100 times before, and my hands tightened on the steering wheel as I kept 3 cars between us. 28 minutes later, he exited onto Route 3 toward Westerville. I'd never been to Westerville with Daniel. We had no friends there, no family, no reason to drive half an hour north for anything. But Daniel knew exactly where he was going. He turned onto a residential street lined with brick townhouses and young maple trees, then pulled into the driveway of a small 2-story unit with a green front door and a tricycle lying sideways on the lawn. He parked, grabbed a grocery bag from the passenger seat, and walked up to the front door like he lived there. I pulled over, 2 houses down, engine idling, heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. The door opened before Daniel could knock. A little boy ran out, maybe 4 years old, dark hair, Daniel's nose, Daniel's smile. The child threw his arms around Daniel's legs and screamed one word that shattered everything I thought I knew. "Daddy!" Daniel dropped to one knee and hugged him, really hugged him. The kind of embrace I'd seen in movies but never in our house. The kind of love you can't fake. Then a woman appeared in the doorway, tired eyes, messy bun, yoga pants, and an oversized sweatshirt. She said something I couldn't hear, and Daniel stood, handing her the grocery bag. She smiled. He kissed her forehead. And then all three of them disappeared inside like this was the most normal Saturday morning in the world. I sat in my car, unable to move, unable to breathe. My husband had a child, a woman, a home, a life that didn't include me. This wasn't an affair. Affairs are stolen nights and hotel rooms and guilt. This was a family, a routine. A little boy who knew Daniel's face better than I knew his secrets. I don't know how long I sat there, minutes, maybe an hour. The world outside the windshield blurred into shapes and colors that didn't make sense anymore. I thought about walking up to that green door and demanding answers. I thought about calling the police, though I didn't know what crime to report. I thought about driving away and pretending I'd never followed him at all. But I couldn't move. Because the worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was realizing that Daniel had been carrying groceries to another family while I ate dinner alone. That he'd been tucking another child into bed while telling me he was working late. That every lie he'd told me was so practiced, so polished, that I'd never even thought to question it. He'd built an entire life 30 minutes away, and I'd been too blind to see it. I waited 3 days before I went back. 3 days of moving through my life like a ghost, making coffee, driving to work, smiling at patients, coming home to Daniel and pretending I didn't know. He'd ask about my day, and I'd answer in sentences short enough to keep from screaming. At night, he'd fall, asleep next to me, and I'd lie there staring at the ceiling, wondering how many nights he'd done the same thing in Westerville. On Tuesday afternoon, I drove back to the townhouse. This time, I wasn't there to watch. I was there for answers. I knocked on the green door at 2 p.m, a time when I knew Daniel would be at his actual job. The woman answered, holding a dish towel, her hair pulled back, no makeup, looking younger than I'd expected. Maybe 28, maybe younger. "Can I help you?" she asked. "My name is Ava Mitchell," I said. "I'm Daniel's wife." The dish towel slipped from her hands. She stared at me like I'd just told her the sun was cold. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. I watched her face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and then something worse. Recognition. The kind that comes when puzzle pieces you didn't know were missing suddenly snap into place. "His wife," she repeated, "for 5 years. That's not possible, sir." Her voice cracked. "Daniel told me you were his ex. He said you wouldn't stop calling him, that you were obsessed, that he had to get a restraining order." The words hit me like a fist to the chest. "He told you I was stalking him?" She nodded, gripping the door frame like she needed it to stay upright. "He said you couldn't accept the breakup, that you kept showing up at his apartment. He showed me texts from a blocked number." Crazy texts. Threatening texts. He said that's why he changed his phone number. To get away from you. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. I never sent him any texts like that. I've had the same number since we got married. Married. She said the word like she was testing it. "You're actually married to him, right now. Right now, this morning, last Saturday when he brought groceries to your house." Her legs seemed to give out. She sat down hard on the front step, her head in her hands. I sat down next to her, 2 strangers on a porch in Westerville, both realizing we'd been living inside the same lie. "My name is Melissa," she said quietly. "We've been together 6 years. Our son just turned 4. 6 years. He'd been with her longer than he'd been with me." "Does he live here?" I asked. 3 nights a week, sometimes 4. He tells me he works overnight shifts at the warehouse the other nights." She laughed, bitter and broken. "I guess that's when he's with you." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of it pressing down on both of us. Daniel hadn't just cheated, he'd built two complete lives, two complete families, with the same lies told in reverse. I was the stalker ex to her. She was probably the crazy ex to me if he'd ever bothered to mention her at all. The shampoo, I said suddenly. The expensive one. Vanilla and amber. Melissa looked up Sam. That's my favorite scent. I buy it for him at Ulta. He knows I love when he smells like it. And there it was. The final piece. The reason Daniel had exploded when I used it. The reason he'd panicked when I diluted it. It wasn't just shampoo. It was Melissa's scent. Her choice. Her love language. And every time he walked into this house smelling like vanilla and amber, he was showing her he cared. That he was hers. Except he wasn't. He was performing, for both of us. With different scripts? What do we do? Melissa asked. I looked at her. Really looked at her. She wasn't my enemy. She wasn't the other woman. She was another victim sitting on the same porch, holding the same shattered pieces, trying to figure out which parts were real. We stopped letting him control the story, I said. Revenge isn't loud. It's not dramatic. It's quiet and methodical, built one piece of evidence at a time. Melissa and I met twice more that week. Once, at a coffee shop in Polaris, where we spread bank statements across a corner table and matched dates. Once in my car outside a library in Dublin, where we compared photos on our phones and realized Daniel had worn the same shirt to both our birthday dinners. Different years, same smile. We weren't friends, not yet. We were two women holding fragments of the same broken mirror, trying to see the full picture. He pays for this house, Melissa said, showing me a lease agreement with Daniel's name on it. He told me his name had to be on the paperwork because my credit was bad. I believed him. I showed her our joint checking account. He takes out cash every week. $200. Sometimes $300. I thought it was for lunches and gas. She nodded. That's what he gives me for groceries. We weren't just comparing stories anymore. We were building a case. I started documenting everything. I took photos of Daniel's work schedule pinned to our fridge, the one that claimed he worked Saturdays when he was actually in Westerville. I recorded a voicemail where he told me he'd be late because of inventory, then drove past his warehouse and found his truck missing. I pulled old credit card statements and highlighted charges for duplicate purchases. 2 birthday cakes in 1 week, 2 anniversary dinners in 1 month. 2 lives maintained with the same credit limit. Melissa did the same. She photographed Daniel's gym bag, the one he kept in her closet, filled with work clothes that still smelled like my laundry detergent. She screenshotted text conversations where he promised he'd leave his crazy ex alone once the restraining order went through. She found receipts for things he'd told me he bought for us, but had actually bought for her. We compiled everything into a shared folder: photos, bank records, timelines. Lie by lie, receipt by receipt. We built a map of Daniel's double life that was impossible to deny, but evidence wasn't enough. We needed leverage. I called a family lawyer on Thursday morning. Her name was Patricia Simmons, and she had an office in Clintonville with framed degrees on the wall and a no-nonsense voice that made me feel less alone. This isn't uncommon, she said after I explained the situation. Bigamy is rare, but financial fraud in marriage happens more than you'd think. If he's been using joint assets to support another household without your knowledge, that's grounds for divorce and possible criminal charges. What about her? I asked. Melissa, his other family. She can file for child support. Paternity test will prove he's the father. Once that's established, he's legally obligated to pay, whether he's married to you or not. I felt something shift in my chest. Not relief, not quite, but something close to control. What do you need from me? I asked. Everything you've gathered, and a recorded statement from the other woman, if she's willing. Melissa was willing. We met Patricia together the following Tuesday. Melissa brought her son's birth certificate, medical records, and a paternity acknowledgement Daniel had signed when the boy was born. I brought 5 years of financial records and a list of every lie I could remember. Patricia listened, took notes, and finally leaned back in her chair. "You two realize what you're doing here, right?" she said. "Once this starts, there's no going back. His life as he knows it ends." Melissa and I looked at each other. "Good," we said at the same time. That night I went home and cooked dinner like nothing had changed. Daniel came through the door at 6:30, kissed my cheek, and asked what smelled good. I smiled and told him spaghetti. He sat on the couch and scrolled through his phone while I set the table, and I watched him exist in our house, like he hadn't just destroyed 2 families to build his own comfort. He had no idea what was coming, and that's exactly how I wanted it. We chose a Thursday afternoon. Patricia scheduled the meeting at her office, telling Daniel it was about estate planning paperwork I wanted to file. He didn't question it. Why would he? I'd never given him a reason to suspect I knew anything. I'd been the perfect wife for 5 years, trusting, predictable, exactly where he left me. He showed up at 3 o'clock wearing his work uniform, still smelling like diesel and cardboard. Patricia greeted him professionally, shaking his hand, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. I sat in the corner, hands folded in my lap, watching him settle in with the confidence of a man who thought he was still in control. "So what's this about?" Daniel asked, glancing at me. "Ava said something about updating our will?" Patricia opened a manila folder. "Actually, Daniel, we're here to discuss your 2 households." The color drained from his face. She slid a photo across the desk. Daniel standing on a porch in Westerville, holding a little boy. "That's your son, correct? 4 years old, born 3 years into your marriage to Ava." Daniel's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Patricia slid another document forward. Bank statements with highlighted withdrawals. $300 a week in cash, used to pay for groceries, utilities, and rent at a townhouse registered under your name. Would you like to explain that? "I don't know what you're talking about," Daniel stammered. "You don't know about the townhouse on Maple Grove Drive? Or Melissa Turner, the woman you've been living with 3 nights a week for the past 6 years?" His hands started shaking. That's when the office door opened. Melissa stepped inside. Daniel stood so fast his chair tipped backward. He looked at her, then at me, then back at her, and I watched the exact moment he realized what had happened. We'd found each other. We'd compared notes. We'd built a case he couldn't lie his way out of. "You two," his voice cracked. "You talked to each other?" "We did more than talk," I said quietly. Patricia stacked the documents neatly. "Your wife is filing for divorce on grounds of fraud and emotional abuse. Ms. Turner is filing for child support and full custody. Paternity test is already scheduled. You'll be paying for 2 households now, Daniel. Legally." Daniel sank back into his chair, head in his hands. For a moment, he looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, broken, human, almost pitiable. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this," he whispered. "How did you mean for it to happen?" Melissa asked. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the anger underneath. "Were you going to tell me about her? Or just keep lying until one of us figured it out?" I was trying to make everyone happy. "By making us both miserable?" I leaned forward. "You told her I was a stalker. You told me you were working overtime. You made us afraid of shadows while you played house in 2 zip codes." He looked up, and I saw something I didn't expect. Genuine confusion. Like he'd actually believed his own lies for so long that he'd forgotten they were lies at all. Like he'd convinced himself that splitting his life down the middle was a noble sacrifice instead of a selfish betrayal. "I loved both of you," he said. "No," Melissa said. "You loved yourself." Patricia handed him the divorce papers, then the custody filing. He stared at them like they were written in a language he didn't understand. Outside the window, rush hour traffic hummed on High Street. Somewhere in Columbus, people were going home to families that were real. whole, built on truth instead of schedules. Daniel signed the papers without reading them. His hand shook so badly, the signature barely looked like his own. When he left the office, he didn't look at either of us. He just walked out into the October afternoon, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, not relief. Just the quiet certainty that I'd never have to wonder where he was again. The divorce was finalized in January. Daniel didn't contest it. He couldn't. The evidence was overwhelming, and his lawyer advised him to settle quickly before criminal fraud charges became part of the conversation. He agreed to split our assets, which weren't much, a savings account with $4,000, a used Honda I'd already been driving, furniture from IKEA that neither of us wanted to fight over. The only thing that mattered was what he'd pay going forward. Child support for Melissa's son. Alimony for me, at least temporarily, until I could stabilize on my own. The court calculated it based on his income, divided between two households he'd created, and suddenly, the man who'd been living a double life on a warehouse supervisor's salary had to account for every dollar. He moved into a studio apartment in Whitehall, alone. No space for secrets. No room for lies. Melissa kept the townhouse. I signed the lease over to her name, and she repainted the living room a soft gray, erasing the last traces of Daniel's presence. Her son started preschool that fall. She sent me a photo of his first day, backpack almost bigger than he was, smiling at the camera with Daniel's eyes. I moved into a one-bedroom apartment in Clintonville, close enough to the clinic that I could walk to work on good days. It was small, quiet, the kind of place where you could hear your own thoughts again. I bought new sheets, new towels, new shampoo that smelled like lavender instead of vanilla and amber. Melissa and I texted occasionally. Not often. We weren't best friends, and we probably never would be. But we checked in. She'd send updates about her son. I'd share articles about co-parenting after betrayal. We'd meet for coffee every few months, two women who'd survived the same wreckage, still figuring out how to stand. One afternoon in March, almost a year after I'd grabbed that shampoo bottle, Melissa called me. "I have something to tell you," she said. I braced myself, unsure if I wanted to hear it. "I threw away all the vanilla amber shampoo," she continued. "Every bottle. I couldn't smell it anymore without thinking of him, without remembering what it represented." I understood completely. I did the same thing, I admitted. Not just the shampoo. Everything. I got rid of anything that reminded me of who I was when I didn't know the truth. "Do you think we'll ever trust anyone again?" she asked. I thought about it for a moment, about the version of myself that had believed Daniel's overtime stories and never checked his pay stubs, about the woman who'd stood in the shower that Tuesday morning, confused by a scent she didn't recognize, too afraid to ask the right questions. "I think we'll trust ourselves," I said. "And that's a start." They say betrayal changes you, that once someone breaks your trust, you carry the fracture forever. Maybe that's true. Maybe I'll always be the woman who followed her husband to a secret family. Maybe Melissa will always be the woman who believed a lie for 6 years, but we're also the women who fought back. Daniel thought he could build himself a comfortable life on our ignorance. He thought he could keep us separated, silent, ashamed. He thought we'd never compare notes or ask questions or realize we deserved better than a man who could only love us in shifts. He was wrong. The shampoo was never about the scent. It was about what I'd been too afraid to see. A man protecting something that didn't belong to him. A marriage built on schedules instead of honesty. A life I'd never agreed to live. Now, when I stand in my own bathroom and reach for my own shampoo, I don't think about Daniel. I think about the question I finally asked that changed everything. What are you hiding? And I remember that some questions are worth the answers, no matter how much they destroy. Because the truth doesn't break you. Living inside someone else's lie does. He broke us to build himself. But in the end, we rebuilt stronger, wiser, free. And we did it without him.